Diamond City, Krygor Labs, Dr. Krygor, Super Maker-Matic 21. Hey, fix my TV. Or trade me for one of those. Those are not televisions. It features graphics, artificial intelligence or AI, music, game. This might just be my ticket to riches! Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Jewel here, and I am from the likes of the Mexi Toys videos, as you probably expect at this point in time. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our new Let's Play for the channel, and this time we're going back into WarioWare again, after the event of WarioWare Move It for the Nintendo Switch, which is by far the most recent entry in the series up to this point. So let's go back in time during the events within 2009, or technically 2010, if you lived in the American version as well as the European countries, because as you can tell, we are experiencing WarioWare D.I.Y, or simply called WarioWare Do-It-Yourself if you lived in the European countries, for the Nintendo DS. So as you can tell, for the fact that if you do manage to able to use the touchscreen right there, you can able to actually not only trying to hold the actual game's logo, but in addition about the fact that you can also drag it as well, and if you let go, you simply dive into the actual game itself. In fact, I'd like to prove it to you now. So much to the point, as the actual game suggests, this game is basically like a prequel, technically, as the forms of Super Mario Maker, where remember back in during the forms of it back in the day, that basically though, this game applies about the fact that not only does this game came out on the Nintendo DS, but also there's also a mini bite-sized version called WarioWare D.I.Y Showcase for the WiiWare. Now as you can tell, for the first half of the year, we're only going to be showing you guys the DS version first, and then as soon as we dive into next month, presumably speaking though, we can able to actually show off the WiiWare version for the sake of the forms of the showcase, because as far as I'm aware, that there are some differences between both the DS version and the WiiWare version basically, which we'll discuss more about that if we dive into the actual main gameplay of specifically WarioWare D.I.Y for the DS version first. So, because as far as you can definitely tell for the fact that, well, today's date of course is the 14th of June today, in some cases in 2025 today, and I can't even believe by saying this is about the fact it's been 9 days ago since when the actual Nintendo Switch 2 did somehow came out, alongside with the forms of Mario Kart World as well. So much to the point, for the fact that, well, relatively speaking, I was about the fact that at this point in time, that, you know, we're still busy playing through Nintendo Switch 2 on our spare own time, as we expected, but let's not get about ourselves at this point right now, because as you can see, that we only able to actually access to 2 different modes, if you couldn't tell, like the garage setting, which is basically just like an options menu, and in addition to the DIY shop, which is basically the main focus of the forms of the entire game, that not only you can able to actually experience your very own custom-made microgames, because back in the day, this game utilizes the online functionality for not only for trying to able to make your very own microgames, but also you can able to send those microgames anywhere around the world, thanks to the forms of the glorious Nintendo Wi-Fi connection back in 2000 well, I would classify for saying since 2005, when it's somehow firstly introduced, the forms of the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, all thanks to Mario Kart DS, and as far as I'm aware, it wasn't until 9 years later where, sadly though, the service has been shut down during the Evolves event 2014. So this means, unfortunately though, you can no longer send the forms of microgames anywhere around the world, but also receiving someone else's microgames as well. So logically speaking, I was about the fact that, again, that was before when Super Mario Maker, in addition to Super Mario Maker 2 as well, has also introduced into ourselves some custom-made stuff from anywhere around the world, made by fans alike. So either way, let's go ahead and type my name on here. In some cases, I am Joel here, because the last time I actually did somehow experience WarioWare was actually thanks to the forms of Coco Bandicoot did somehow let me join in a multiplayer aspect of WarioWare Move It, apart from the fact that we did somehow missed out on one mode, just because it does require 4 controllers, or specifically 4 Joy-Con controllers, or nowadays with, well, let's just say, for instance, though, just Joy-Con 1 in general, because, as you probably already expect, some microgames in WarioWare Move It requires the actual AR or IR camera sensor on the Joy-Con right. So, because obviously, though, Joy-Con 2 does not have the IR camera support. So, yeah, that's why I classify that. So, for the most part, though, as you can see, this is basically, it's like a tutorial segment, basically, that you can able to actually introduce into ourselves how the game itself actually plays out to be. And as you can see, we now ended up in the game Blender, which not only for the fact that we can able to actually experience certain microgames for some characters, like for instance though, the first stage we're going to be diving into is Mona right here, and basically though, according to the actual description for it, it did manage to able to say that several microgames are based off from strange games, you know, just like the advance of how it does on the past WarioWare games, since on the Game Boy Advance, for the sake of the advance of Mona stage anyway. So because of that, and of course, just like the advance of how it does it on any other WarioWare games basically, I will try my best able to go through every single microgames of how this particular version of the game actually has to offer, in addition to next month's WiiWare counterpart, you know, with WarioWare D.I.Y. Showcase, but obviously that was about the fact that we'll discuss more about that if we dive into next month, if possible. So anyway, so, without further ado, let's dive into the forms of the first stage in the forms of WarioWare D.I.Y. for the Nintendo DS version specifically. That's of course Mona stage. So because of that, I'm very curious to know, oh, she's actually the Temple Explorer this time, which I can definitely tell from her costume outfit, so logically though, she might be able to actually try to find plethora of treasure, which as a result, yeah, it does remind me of the forms of the Wario Land 4 vibes, but that's besides the point. So, obviously if you couldn't tell, similar to the forms of how it does it in WarioWare Touched, this game does require you to use the touchscreen controls. However though, unlike in WarioWare Touched, that you can able to actually do 3 different actions and all that stuff, in addition to the 4th control scheme as well, which we'll talk more about that, because as you can definitely tell, I'm pretty sure we have to go through the first 11 microgames to start things off, because obviously though we are still on the actual tutorial part. So because of that though, again, if you ever played any other WarioWare games before, you'll feel right at home. Basically though, any other microgames are basically it's like a 5-second microgames you can able to actually just diving into, because you have to be quick enough and fast enough throughout, because otherwise if you're too slow or made any other mistakes, as you can see on the top screen portion of the game, basically though you do have 4 lives to start things off, but then if you run out of lives, then your run is basically over. So, and every once in a while, the actual microgame speed is about to increase slightly, so as a result though, it's about the fact that one thing you might able to actually realize about this is that unlike in any other WarioWare games, since, let's just say, WarioWare Inc. Minigame Mania, in addition to WarioWare Twisted, and in addition to WarioWare Touched, and WarioWare Smooth Moves, and among all others as well, that this game only has level 1 variants of some microgames for whatever reason, because I almost first thought that we were able to expect to come across into ourselves the level 3 portion of some microgames, but we'll discuss on that later. So as you can tell, the game somehow interruptedly ends after we somehow return back into the D.I.Y. shop, all thanks to the faults that the actual major host of the actual mode called Abby, but it turns out that Wario was there because I'm pretty sure enough though is about the fact that this is one of the main selling points in terms of the forms of WarioWare D.I.Y, not only for the DS, but also for the WiiWare as well, because as you probably expect, that we're about to be diving into the first few steps in terms of the forms of, you can able to actually make your very own micro games for the very first time, which I really do wish if that particular concept will return, possibly for the next installments for the Nintendo Switch 2, if possible, because in the, Nintendo Switch 2, it now has mouse support, so because of that though, I'm very generous to know of how that's going to place out to be, but time will definitely tell though, because as you can see, we have to draw a monster, so because of this though, let's just say I'm also able to make things a little bit quicker and faster, because straight to the point though, I'm not exactly a masterpiece when it comes to likely trying to make the own custom-made let's just say micro games or stages for the likes of Super Mario Maker 1 as well as Super Mario Maker 2, but regardless of such though, once you're done with that particular stuff, then obviously though, I think we're about to be jumped straight into the actual micro game itself. So because of that though, thanks to Wario right here, so because of that though, yeah, you simply tap the actual bottom screen and that's all you have to do basically, in addition to the majority of those micro games as well, made specifically by Nintendo of course, so logically though is about the fact that there's no swiping back and forth, or in addition to flicking anymore, and in addition to rotation movements, and not to mention though is about the fact that I've also realized that this game will have microphone support, which I'm not exactly sure how do I explain about this is, because I will have to admit it though right away, it's been ages since I actually have last played this game for sure, because relatively speaking though, I'm pretty much more accustomed to any other WarioWare games, like, for instance, with WarioWare Get It Together, and in addition to WarioWare Gold, WarioWare Move It, and etc, but regardless of such though, it's about the fact that as you can tell, that we're immediately able to actually access to the D.I.Y games side of the forms of the game blender right there. So logically though is about the fact that we can able to actually dive into 3 modes for the sake of time, but we'll discuss more about that during at some point until tomorrow, because as you probably expect, the actual portions of WarioWare D.I.Y is going to be most likely focusing on the weekends at this point, because this particular game is not going to be that long to complete anyway. Well, in terms of the forms of trying to able to obtain every single normal micro games, as far as I can definitely tell, because still, it is a shame about the fact that the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection has been shut down since, 11 years ago as a matter of fact, so this means about the fact that still, we can no longer try to receive some very cool micro game designs made by everyone around the world, as long as you were able to do some bit of hacking, not only for your DS, and also for the Wii as well, which is virtually impossible for me to do, but I do know for a fact it's kind of simple when you get the hang of it though, but regardless of such though, is about the fact that there's nothing right to harm about. So, anyway, so that pretty much does it for trying to show you guys the forms of those specific shelves right there. So let's just go ahead and go back into the forms of the Mona stage again, because as far as I'm aware, now as you can tell, we are still basically stuck with the forms of Mona stage for the time being, because as far as I'm aware, it wasn't until whatever we get to tomorrow anyway, alongside with the next day, and the next day, and the next day after, we might able to actually unlock even more stages. So as a result, I'm pretty sure this particular version of WarioWare D.I.Y will be able to actually experience 5 stages. So because of that though, unlike the forms of how it does on the WiiWare counterparts, there's only going to be 4, which as a result, again, we'll discuss more about that if we dive into the WiiWare version at some point until next month, like I said before. Because straight to the point though, it almost kind of reminds me like the forms of the first half and the second half combined with its whole completely entirely different package when it comes to the forms of trying to do this Let's Play in general. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below for the question of the day. What was your first impressions about the forms of WarioWare D.I.Y back in the day when you first encountered this game? Well, for me though, that despite the fact I haven't exactly experienced for myself until sometime in 2011, thanks to the forms of the Rio film as to be expected. Oh, speaking of films though actually, I did recently manage able to finally check out the forms of the Blue Sky Studios film, all thanks to the forms of the Disney Plus anyway. I did somehow recently watch Spies in Disguise, and what's my final thoughts of it though? it was alright. I mean, relatively speaking, though, despite the fact that, well, relatively speaking, I just simply really still have some hopes with Rio 3, but regardless of such, though, Spies in Disguise is alright. I mean, logically, though, is about the fact I'm still pretty much used to with, like, watching, or rewatching, rather, both Rio 1 and Rio 2, especially, because both of those films still reminds me of summer, but I digress. So, because I do like the fact that with the forms of, one of those characters did somehow manage able to transforming into a pigeon of some sort, which is almost comes close to the forms of Rio 3 vibes, except the fact that it's almost like a spy movie, rather than just the forms of that particular, whatever genre they're going for. So anyway, let's get into the forms of the micro games themselves, basically, because as you can see, this is the forms of the boss micro game for Mona stage anyway. Oh, by the way, every time whenever you do manage to complete or failed the actual boss micro game, sometimes though we get ourselves a touchscreen intermission right there. So logically though is about the fact that, as you can tell, this is the European version, by the way, because obviously as you can tell that we're able to actually see the pounds currency, which means about the fact that if it's pounds, this means it's the UK version, and if you play the game on the American version, I'm pretty sure it's like dollars. And then finally, most notably though, if you lived in Japan, I'm pretty sure it's gonna be yen. So at least as far as I can recall correctly. So anyway, so yeah, for the most part though, is about the fact that this game is just basically just WarioWare touched, except, well, you can obviously now create your very own micro games, which is pretty awesome back in the day, despite, you know, the online functionality is no longer existence anymore, which still, it is kind of sucks even to this day, but regardless of such though, you can still able to experience the game, specifically the DS version, because it is so unfortunate that nowadays that you can't able to actually buy the WarioWare version now, just because alongside with that, the Wii Shop channel was also dead during that time, specifically in 2019, and I'm like, that is very, very, very unacceptable. But regardless of such though, yeah, that's as far as I can try to say about this, I guess. So, anyways though, as far as I'm aware, that each and every single stage does manage to contain about 18 micro games each, at least to be more specifically on the DS version, because I don't know about the forms of the WiiWare version though, just because, again, it's been such a very long time since I actually have last played this game, as you probably would expect. So, anyway, in terms of some other stuff, I'd like to point things out as well, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that I don't think it's possible for me to able to actually showcase the forms of some of these custom-made micro games or anything else like that, because I'm not exactly a great editor to me though, but I will try my best if I was able to try to show you guys some plentiful of micro games made by Nintendo themselves, specifically in the Diamond Software category. So because of that though, yeah, you can pretty much guarantee what this is going. So anyway, and also I thought it was a little bit weird, specifically in this game, alongside with the WiiWare counterpart, that you can't able to actually play the boss micro games during the forms of the actual the game selection screen, which you see what I mean if we did somehow manage able to check out the forms of the bookshelf again, to able to actually double check if we do manage to obtain every single micro games of how this game actually has to offer. So, and as far as I'm aware, this particular boss micro game right there, called Fly in Fall, I'm pretty sure that particular boss micro game will eventually make its return from the likes of WarioWare Gold. So as a result, yeah, because as a matter of fact though, it's about the fact that, as you can tell, the main objective in this one is pretty simple. Basically though, you're simply trying to able to like, you know, carefully tap the actual, the balloons, so just in case you can able to pop the balloons, and it's your job to able to drop the people onto the plateau. So because of that, although mind you, it does say the actual description for it, so we'll discuss more about that if we somehow end things off with the third run of the Forms of Mona stage anyway. So logically though, is about the fact that I think suffice to say, oh jeez, I did not expect with that particular unpredictable movement right there with that little drip right there, but regardless of such though, because I wasn't fast enough. But anyway, so yeah, there's nothing else I could really say, apart from the fact that there's one little thing I'm surprised that Maxi has completely forgot to mention about, and that's what it appears to be for the fact that at this point in time, that recently though, Boulder Dash 40th Anniversary Edition is getting a Nintendo Switch release date, and suffice to say though, since that we actually got that, for celebrating the 40th anniversary, why can Nintendo just somehow celebrate the Mario's 40th anniversary? I mean, it's a bit early to say this right about now, because I'm pretty sure they're about to save it up and during at some point until in September, so I think possibilities were endless, I guess. So anyway. So yeah, as I explained this to you before, is about the fact that there is no difficulty progression depending on what specific micro games you're in, because I'm pretty sure this is now the well, this was normally supposed to be level 2 variation as far as I'm aware of, but usually most of the time though, we only able to experience level 1 variations of some microgames, including boss microgames as well, which I found was a little bit too bizarre to me though, but regardless of such though, yeah, every difficulty remains the same, so there's no level 2 variant or level 3 variant, so yeah, that might take a bit of a while to get used to, especially noticeable that, well, at the very least though, I think it's kind of similar to the evolves of how it does it for that D.I.Y game called WarioWare Snapped, where basically though is about the fact that that particular game also has only level 1 variants for some micro games, but not level 2 or level 3, so because of that though, it is rather odd during the evolves of around by the end of the 2000s era during that time, but either way, that's besides the point, so, okay, that's what I was supposed to do right there. Well, again though, it's been ages since I actually have last played this, but glad able to actually finally get a chance to able to experience this after all, especially considering for the fact at this point in time that we are basically almost completely done in terms of every single WarioWare games in terms of Let's Plays department. Well, apart from a few exceptions here and there, like for instance though WarioWare Snapped, and in addition to Game & Wario, and most notably WarioWare Gold for the 3DS, just because we still don't have the 3DS capture device. So because of that though, again, it's a little bit expensive nowadays, way more expensive than the defaults of how it does it for recently for Nintendo Switch 2, but that's besides the point. So, assuming I was still really hoping about the fact that they'll bring that, you know, trying to make your very own micro games concept again, for the sake of, like, let's just say, for the Nintendo Switch 2 installment or something like that, because, you know, mouse controls is now supported for the Nintendo Switch 2, so anyway. So, yeah, that's as far as we can able to say about this, and speaking of the forms of Nintendo Switch 2, actually kind of thinking about it, we'll save that particular topic for a later time, because as far as I'm aware, there's technically the final thing I want to mention about something, and that's what appears to be for the fact that out of nowhere, there's a new update that's going to be coming for the likes of Disney Magic Kingdom's application, and suffice to say, there's a new update, which appears to be update number 95, stands for the code named, yes, Cars characters will make an appearance on Disney Magic Kingdom. So because of that, because I think that pretty much signifies that Lightning McQueen's number for the actual sides and the top, and you get the idea for this point. So, I digress. So as you can see on screen, that, you know, Mona's icon is actually now in full color, which means we somehow unlocked every single micro games. So, for instance though, in terms of micro games though, we somehow come across into All a Flatter, and in addition to My New Bow, Stop That, Off Lane, Crayon Epic, The Irony, Drop and Stop, Bug Hunt, Emo Cube, and Tooth Haste, and in addition to Dry Eye, Gold Digger, the good old classic Gold Digger from the likes of the forms of ever since in the Game Boy Advance days, Big Dripper, Stoplight, Joker Face, I Saw It, Broke Down or Breakdown, I Can Smash, and that's about it. And there's also the boss micro game called Fly and Fall, but for whatever reason, the boss micro game never shows up on a game selection because you have to specifically try to get back into the stage again and able to experience the boss micro game again. Despite, I will admit though, those boss micro games are a lot shorter compared to the forms of how it does on the previous games for some reason, but that's besides the point. So with that being said folks, is that we get endings off this point right here, so join me next time for some more of Let's Play of WarioWare D.I.Y or WarioWare Do It Yourself for the Nintendo DS. Is that until tomorrow, we're about to be experiencing the next stage, which if I can recall correctly, it's Jimmy T. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later fellas!